And that is the whole truth of this case. In order to understand it myself, I had to know the story of these last 7 long years. Nothing happens by chance. All is connected. And now, you stand ready to begin the final chapter of this story. Will the defendant be found guilty or innocent? The decision is yours. Trucy's been obsessed with Valant ever since the last trial, and Apollo's been trying to write about the case for the last 3 months as well. At this point, I know the feeling. It's good to take breaks now and then. Apollo decides to watch a bit of TV with Trucy, and sees an advertisement for Troop Gramarye's latest performance, and their first in 7 years. Phoenix comes in to tell Apollo about the secret mission he briefly referred to at the end of the last case. He's been working to introduce the jurist system, replacing the judge's verdict with the votes of 6 jurors, for Apollo's upcoming trial. If it sounds like he's springing the jurist system upon Apollo just as much as he is the case itself, that's because the game is, in a sense, propaganda. It's time for a history lesson. Despite its march toward imperialism, Japan introduced a jury system in the early 20th century, with the intent of showing the budding League of Nations that Japan had made democratic strides as a country. However, political pressure meant that this jury would not break at the empire's fabric more than necessary. The jury was limited to tax-paying males of 30 years or older, and only required for felony charges, excluding most major offenses against the government itself, such as treason. Defendants gave up their right to appeal when undergoing a jury trial, and, if they wished for a jury to hear a misdemeanor case, they had to pay for the jurors' travel expenses themselves. Jury verdicts were neither unanimous nor binding, nor even directly affecting the defendant's guilt in many cases, often instead related to the basic facts of the case. Jury trials were faster, averaging 2 days instead of 14 months for so-called bench trials without a jury, and acquittal rates were 5 times higher during its existence than in the years preceding the adoption of the current lay judge system. However, nearly all sides took issue with the imperial jury. Defendants often bore heavy cost, whether financial or through giving up some of their rights in exchange for a trial by jury. Counsel would at times recommend the bench over the jury because, while the chance for conviction was lower, the opportunity to appeal would drop to 0. Judges also argued to defendants to waive their right to a jury trial for this reason, in addition to conservative opinions that a judge's word was not to be intruded upon by commoners. Prosecutors disliked the higher acquittal rate that the system brought about, and complained that court preparation became more difficult and expensive for the state as well. Finally, the Second World War acted as a double whammy to seal the deal. Most people eligible for jury duty were actively performing military duty, and with the Axis powers ostracized from the rest of the developed world, Japan no longer had a reason to pretend that they held such democratic values. The system was formally suspended in 1943, and stayed that way despite Western intervention after the war, because, according to the Ministry of Justice, the citizens of Japan had seen their empire, and thus its jury system, fail, and cultural differences meant that Japanese society had no need for such a system. Japan's 20th century jury came and went in just 25 years. Trucy has one more distraction for us, the Gramarye revival. She insists that they visit Sunshine Coliseum, and Phoenix agrees that Apollo should take her. Phoenix gives her a recycle your plastics day card, further highlighting the weird relationship between the two of them. The envelope has the seal of Troop Gramarye, but Phoenix sternly warns that Trucy is not allowed to open it. He also declines to tell Apollo about the case, and says he's not allowed to talk to anyone involved, but he does allow them to investigate the crime scene, if they can find it. For now, Apollo visits the detention center, but the client doesn't seem to be there. She's hiding behind a wall next to the glass pane, and, much like Apollo's previous defendants, she does not say a word. Even Mr. Hat is powerless to invoke conversation. Just when they're about to leave, she talks! and gives Apollo a business card for Drew Studio, whatever that is. Apollo and Trucy arrive at the studio, and an outline marks a dead body indeed. They see a trio of canvases propped up, with one half finished, and Emma Skye, who reveals that the victim is the artist here, and that the defendant is his daughter. Drew Misham was an inverted illustrator who communicated entirely through his mailbox. His daughter, Vera Misham, was the only one allowed in the studio, apart from last night, where he accepted his first, and last, interview. Vera is apparently introverted too, only agreeing to be taken out of the studio if she'd be allowed to have her good luck charm. Vera made her father a cup of coffee at 9 p.m., and traces of poison were found in the mug's lip, but nowhere in the coffee. Vera herself has said that the interviewer didn't touch Drew's coffee at all. Apollo and Trucy investigate. They find a canvas behind a desk that looks just like the half-finished painting on one of the easels, and a red envelope in another desk that's been opened and sealed again. The letter is dated 7 years ago. Apollo asks Emma to help scientifically, and she starts by allowing them to spray for traces of atrocodine, the poison that Drew died by, elsewhere in the room. Only one other thing in the room gets a reaction, a 2x2-inch photo frame. Apollo asks about the red envelope, and Emma pulls out an X-ray machine. This is probably the most boring minigame thus far. Even on the DS, it's not fun to play, but the context in which it's used is exemplary. After 3.5 minutes, the contents make themselves clear, literally. It seems someone gave $100,000 to Drew for a commission 7 years ago, along with instructions to return a receipt using an enclosed stamp and envelope as soon as possible. There aren't any stamps or envelopes in the victim's room, apart from this one, so he likely followed through on this. Apollo asks for details on the reporter, and while she can't say too much, she gives Apollo a name in Spark Brushel, and lets slip that he's been trying to interview Valent Grand-Marie. Apollo finally has a reason to return to Sunshine Coliseum, where he and Trucy are greeted enthusiastically by the Yellow Magician. He and Trucy lament the absence of his partner Zach, and bask in the excitement of his upcoming show, and talk about his mentor, Magnify, too. Valent notes that no one has been able to practice Magnify's magic in 7 years because of intellectual property laws. He gave his magic's performance rights to Zach Grand-Marie, who disappeared 7 years ago. And after 7 years, missing people are considered dead. Without a will on Zach's part, Magnify's will had the rights go to Valent. Apollo presents the pink envelope Phoenix gave Trucy earlier, and Valent freaks out. The signature is that of Zach Grand-Marie himself, and Valent all but demands to open it. Apollo doesn't let him, but I speak for everyone when I say that we're all even more intrigued as to its contents now. Apollo also asks about Spark, the journalist, and Valent initially had Spark come to interview him about the show. However, he only wanted to ask Valent about the Drew Misham case, and the magician remains so infuriated that he tears the reporter's business card to shreds. At least he mentions that Spark is at the detention center. Apollo and Trucy return to the detention center, and Spark seems to already know him, and bothers everyone in the room with his insinuatingly incendiary headlines. This case's main witness is given a bad rep for his personality, and I will give that he is a bit annoying to talk to. His awkward sprites and silly tics of saying that things are for the record, and making his inferences into headlines have turned many people off from him, but I don't think he's all that bad by his attorney standards. He falls rather well in line with an overly haughty magician, a nearly mute painter's daughter, and an edgy scientific investigator, for instance. Regardless of anyone's opinion on him, Spark tells Apollo secondhand about a stolen painting featuring a giant peach. Apollo returns to Drew's studio and points out the hidden painting to Emma. When he claims that it was stolen, Emma reveals that Drew was a forger. Yet another person in this game who isn't entirely innocent. Phoenix forging evidence, Shadi and Olga trying to cheat at poker, Wonky and his family literally being the mafia, Palmaractus committing malpractice, Wesley being a far too curious thief, Maki being a cocoon smuggler, and now Drew Misham being a forger. It's an intriguing trend, and it plays well into the game's slowly building theme that justice is far from perfect. Speaking of justice, Emma reveals that, as a forger, Drew is free to sketch whatever he'd like as long as the finished paintings lined up like his clients wanted. They use the X-ray machine to analyze the sketches and find... What the heck is all this? I hesitate to ask why you're getting so excited. You sure your device isn't leaking some kind of strange radiation? Trucy, look at these 3 sketches! Do you notice anything? There! Now you're both white as sheets. What's going on? These sketches are of the 3 cases I worked on. What? The murder in the poker room at the Borscht Bowl Club. The dead man pulling the noodle stand. And then... the events that transpired during the Gaviners concert.
What could it mean? How could he have drawn those things? And why? That's what I want to know. Wait, is Drew Misham your father? Give me a break! Does that seem even remotely possible to you? I'd never even heard of any Drew Misham before. I hadn't even seen a picture of him. But there were my cases, drawn on his canvas. Every single one of them. It couldn't have been a coincidence. Just who was this Drew Misham? And what did he have to do with me?
If the Misham Studio theme sounds familiar, try listening to the intro for Turnabout Trump again. That case's intro does feature a painter after all, and the foreshadowing doesn't stop there. Keen-eyed viewers will recognize more than a single face in this shot, for instance. This investigation segment also does a fantastic job to bring the game's intriguing plot points to a head. Trucy and Valent's relationship is expanded upon, and everyone's wonder about her birth father Zach is highlighted when he sees his handwriting on the pink envelope. Drew had been keeping up with Apollo despite being a total shut-in otherwise, and Spark insisted on interviewing Valent about his death for some reason. The letter from 7 years ago, with $100,000 in it, lines up just a bit too neatly with Zach's disappearance. Say, didn't something else happen 7 years ago? Something involving a certain long-standing character of this franchise? If you don't remember, the game and I will remind you soon enough, and there's still plenty that ought to make your mind race.